Welcome to Moonbeaming, a podcast about creativity, magic, tarot, lunar living, and more. I'm your host, Sarah Faith Gottesdiener, and I am so happy you are here today. Hello, and welcome back to Moonbeaming. We are on episode 4. I am so thankful to everyone who has sent messages and rated and reviewed the show and sent emails and posted on the internets and everything. It just fills my little tiny heart with so much joy, and I feel so grateful. I feel so humbled, and I feel so honored to be here with all of you here. So let's get into this show. We are going to talk about the archetype of death, number 13 in the tarot. Before I get into that, I am going to talk a little bit about the card of the week that got pulled. The card of the week for October 19th. We are in a waxing moon. We're building up energy. Our emotions might be building up. You know, this is the time to really be aware of what is coming up for you, what is working, what is not working. And the card that got pulled for this week to serve as a guide, to serve as some support, really asks us to prioritize peace of mind over anything else. Why do I say that? Well, of course, we got the Four of Swords. The Four of Swords can be a card about rest, about giving things a rest, about prioritizing rest, about giving things space. So if that really resonates with you, make that a priority this week, right? The other thing that this card speaks to is a change of mindset that helps us make decisions in more generous, compassionate, and more useful ways. Like sometimes this card will come up when we have to create new building block of systems in our thought processes, like when we have to create new neural pathways, when it's time to move the direction of our attention into pathways that are going to grant us more peace or grant us more clarity. So thinking about that, I think that's really important more and more. Parsing out what helps us make better decisions, parsing out what gives us peace, thinking about what different record do you have to put on in the record of your mind in order to give yourself some grace, some leeway, and to see things from a perspective that is more beneficial and more useful to you. Prioritizing our peace of mind is, priceless, for lack of a better word. So try to do that, my lunar little babes. All right, so let's sink in. Let's dive into this episode I have for y'all today. I wanted to sort of follow up on this collective theme, this collective card of the year theme, which is the Emperor. And I wanted to bring in the idea of teacher cards in the tarot. So this episode, I'm going to use death as the teacher card for the Emperor to continue this conversation about collective cards pattern recognition, working with archetypes in different ways, so on and so forth. And if you haven't listened to the episode where I talk more about the collective cards and the Emperor, that's a couple episodes back. You can check it out. I think it's called All About the Emperor. Now, I think the topic of teacher cards are really cool. They can help us to expand and extend and deepen the interpretations and the meanings of each one of the tarot archetypes. Teacher cards really help to underscore this idea I'm always coming back to in my own practice, which is that everything is a relationship. Yes, I know that is like, you're like, duh, but let's just meditate on that, right? Everything is a relationship. What we learn is through communication. It is through specific relationships that we can gain more understanding, more resonance, and more awareness to really just about everything, right? Now, the idea of teacher cards was first introduced to me by Mary K. Greer. I'm always talking about Mary K. Greer, the tarot theorist, the teacher, the writer. I would love to have her on the podcast. Maybe I will email her to set that up maybe for next year. Her work has been really foundational for me and my understanding of tarot. And I believe this concept of the teacher card of tarot constellations was introduced to her by Angeles Arian, who is a philosopher, teacher, writer, tarot theorist. They have since passed on, but I wanted to name both of these people because I think it is incredibly important for us to cite our sources for so many reasons. It's feminist. It gives credit where credit is due. And also we can figure out, maybe I want to go back into Angeles Arian's work and see where she came across that idea so I can deeper my knowledge base with all of that, right? So I think citing our sources is really important. I will go a little off-road here. Citing our sources is also really important to find out, maybe those sources we don't want to use anymore. I've been grappling a lot with that within my own work recently, finding out that thinkers and philosophers, have a lot of problematic teachings as well as really helpful teachings. It's something I've been grappling with this year in particular. So I think it's important to sort of know where lineage, where ideas come from for all of the reasons. So that's why I'm shouting them out here. Now, the idea of teacher cards relies really heavily on numerology. So we have the Emperor archetype being number 4, relating to death through numerology. The death card is number 13. 1 plus 3 equals 4. That's the Emperor. The Emperor is also part of a larger related constellation of the fours in the minor arcana. And we can see this in the minor arcana 4 suit. There's walls, there's structures, there's the possibility of inventions, innovations. There's also these specific ways to proceed with protection, with boundaries, mindset. All of these things, you can see it illustrated really super easily in the 4s. I'm not going to go into the 4s in this episode. I'm focusing on the relationship between the Emperor and its teacher card death. I've already written long newsletters about working with each of the 4s. I might add them to my blog. I've done that on my newsletter. If you want to sign up for the newsletter, I'll put the link in the show notes. I'll probably be speaking more about the 4s, and I know I'll be talking more about the Fool, which is also in this constellation. The Void is absolutely one of my favorite subjects, so I'll talk all about that in future subjects. But now I'm going to hone in on this idea of the Emperor and death as being related. So Mary K. Greer works with this idea of soul cards, which is a card that correlates to our own number, which is what we get when we add all the dates up of our birthday. According to her view, soul cards can show us our larger life's patterns, lessons, and even our destiny. Attached to that soul card through number are teacher cards. Teacher cards usually encapsulate the fears or the shadows of the archetype. As we mature, we can work with these fears in a conscious and informed way so they can help us grow. So in her teachings, the major arcana cards that all work together are the Emperor, the Death card, the Fool, as well as the Fours. Of course, you don't have to believe in any of this. Like, you don't have to resonate with your soul card. You can work with these archetypes however you'd like. If that means picking a card of the year, a card of the week, whatever, go for it. If you want more insight around an archetype, though, I think that working with the teacher card as a helper is super, super useful. It reminds me of this theory that I love in evolutionary astrology that talks about zodiac signs transforming and evolving through their opposite, through the other, right? The merging of opposites on the zodiacal wheel can help lead to growth. So in some ways, I think of teacher cards that way. It's integrating two opposites in order to access growth and transformation in our various healing processes. So let's get into the relationship between Emperor and Death. A few episodes ago, I talked about the specific qualities of the Emperor: certainty, strategy, confidence, security, all of these things, right? Life, rebirth. We've also spoken about how an extreme version of the Emperor would have one be separate from nature, separate from the natural rhythms and cycles of the planet, firmly lodged in realms of willpower and this like distance that a kind of cerebral, logical, scientific kind of mind can bring. Like when everything is separate from one another or easily categorizable, this can create exploitation. It can create separation. So we can understand how jarring or how dissonant that the energies or the archetype of death can be to this energy, right? Like if the Emperor is about having authority, which means accumulating knowledge, power, and responsibility, this also translates into safety. So therefore, death is one of the most humbling circumstances to add to this, because no matter how special you are, no matter how rich you are, no matter how secure you are, you will die. Your body will cease to exist in a form that you can easily understand. And another humbling aspect of death, perhaps through the eyes of the Emperor, is failure. I mean, in some ways, death can be viewed as the ultimate failure. And also, ironically, seeking perfection, which is really another way for us to harm ourselves and one another, and can sometimes be this byproduct of extreme Emperor energy, can set us up for feelings of failure quite easily. So we can see all the ways that the Emperor archetype might try to avoid death through preservation, through building monuments and empires, through amassing wealth or power or control. And death is the great interrupter, the great disruptor, and a universal truth that all of us have to grapple with. Death, alongside the void, which of course correlates to this Fool energy, could be this like one thing that the mind understands but cannot truly process that great unknown. The emperor feels really comfortable in the known, in the quantifiable. And I know that it sounds like I'm dragging the emperor here, and I'm not, because I really, really do love this archetype. And we can see, though, how the emperor could be so afraid of death because of how much the emperor values and loves life and vitality, how much the emperor wants to make new things and be alive and wants to build and wants to expand. So that's like so much part of this archetype. And so I want to speak at how examining death and different ways that death come up for us in life, all the ways it can show up as a gift as well. There's this New Yorker cartoon I saw once and really remembered because it was a tarot reader sitting across from a turkey on Thanksgiving. And the death card is out, and the tarot reader is saying, "This card is about transformation. You'll be undergoing a profound transformation," or something to that effect. And that's definitely a tarot reader joke, because most likely, anytime you've had a reading and you receive the death card, the reader is going to assure you that this isn't about actual physical death. Because the practice of tarot is not about predicting death or an extreme calamity. In my own experience, the death card has shown up only as this metaphor for all of these things I'm going to get into today. The only time for me it's referenced as like actual sort of literal death in a reading with someone is someone still grappling with the loss of a loved one, someone living in that acute grief because they've lost someone really dear to them. That's the only time it's shown up in thousands and thousands of readings I've given. So usually it really is about this profound transformation. In the tarot, traditionally, death is about a kind of loss or change that occurs when we are forced to evolve and to grow. These changes can be external, like a breakup, or the loss of a job, or something else of an external thing that happens that really shakes us up, right? It can also be internal, like a recovery process or an ego death process. It could be simply that we are outgrowing ourselves, and that is super, super normal. We aren't meant to stay the same. We aren't meant to do the same things all of the time for the rest of our lives. For the Emperor archetype, who has worked so hard to create an identity, to create tangible proof of its existence, that realization can be really, really hard, right? So death can serve as a helper or a midwife of transformation and aid for the emperor undergoing an evolutionary process. Death can ask us to recalibrate our perspective and our behavior around profound change. Like going back to this relationship concept I was talking about earlier, where everything is a relationship, it isn't always the thing, but it is the way we feel about the thing, the way we think about the thing that creates the issue. Because I don't know about y'all, but I've had situations where truly loss ended up being a really, really good thing. But it was the way I was thinking about it. It was the way maybe my ego was stepping in, where I was grasping for things that caused me to have a harmful perspective about something that maybe over time ended up being for my best benefit, because so often the death card can speak to a kind of loss that is ultimately a clearing, right? Ultimately a clearing. And so when we have these grasping thoughts about the thing, or these harmful thoughts about the thing where we're punishing ourselves, that creates this pattern that, has this function to keep us safe, but it also can be what hinders us from smoothly letting go, or letting go with more grace, or stepping forward into transformation with more ease or more trust. Many spiritual teachers share that the point of an awakened or enlightened life is to die many times before our bodies die, right? And this includes the death of false self, the death of false truth, the death of bad habits. This includes sacrifice, which always will include discomfort in some way. This includes letting go, surrender, and also this understanding and acceptance that we are not in control, or we are not in control around certain things. Death, the archetype and the energy of death, can also be a kind of circle of life kind of experience, or undergoing a very intense experience of living that changes you, that doesn't have to be negative, right? It can be, I don't know, your really good friend having a baby and being involved in that, and being around that and having that change you, right? It could be that moment where you realize that you want to have a different kind of career, or you come across a philosophy that like blows your mind. Like I've been tripping out on the principles of permaculture lately, and I'm like, wow, how do I work with these principles in my own life? How is this going to change my life, right? It can be something sparking your interest that you must run towards, that will forever change you, like coming out, like your first queer crush. And you're like, oh my gosh, I think I'm queer. Like, I think I have to run towards this. But what does this mean for my identity? Like, right? Like, maybe I didn't know I was queer, and maybe I am, right? And on and on and on. It can be a pivot in another direction, something that changes the way others view you or how you view yourself, a rejection that gives you great space, It can absolutely be this process of ego death, dismantling that which keeps you small or constricted, as well as shedding aspects of yourself that don't serve you or describe you anymore, or that are inauthentic to your values or your essence. I have to talk about grief and the teachings of grief. If there's one common shared emotion we have been sitting with and experiencing this year, it's grief. So many of us have lost so much. And so many of us have not had the space or the opportunity or the privilege to sit with our grief. So often, when the death card will come up with my clients in readings, I will mention grief and a grief process to them, because grief is one of the greatest accompaniments of death, of this great big loss, of the kind of change that one is forever transformed by. And accepting that grief and being with that grief is part of a death process. Even when something really wonderful happens, even when we're transforming into something beautiful, something more beautiful than we already are, there can be grief there, because grief is the response to change. So acknowledging your grief this year and being with it and being in the different stages of it, sorrow, anger, rage, denial, acceptance, and all of the ways that this comes through. I know there are other stages of grief like bargaining. I think it's really important. I think it's really important to acknowledge that grief is here with us, because it's been very, very, very high this year. And, being with the grief or how it shows up for you, and meditating with the grief and listening to the wisdom that is there is really useful. If we don't let the grief teach us what is most important to us, what is most valuable to us, because that helps teach us what we need to work towards creating, what we need to work towards protecting, which is also what the Emperor can help us do. So now I wanted to just bring up this idea of death as goddess energy. Number 13 is the number of the goddess, as it is the numeral after 12, which some say is this last rational number of civilization. There's like 12 months in a year. Number 13 references the number of lunar cycles that there usually are in a year. It's the number of a coven. It references this energy that is like outside of society or outside of the norm. It also references goddess energy, and that it is like with that lunar energy, it's this energy of seasonal energy. So we have birth, life, death, the void, rebirth again. This is not a linear energy. It is this more natural and winding, magical energy, which of course can be terrifying to some folks, right? Like how we honor different ways of being, how we honor different ways of time, which of course forces us to think about the past, our ancestry, our assorted histories, what a magical life full of meaning looks like, what living in cyclical, seasonal time looks like. It reminds us that energy ripples outwards in unexpected ways. We're reminded that energy cannot be created or destroyed. And on the sort of goddess tip of energy, in the ways in which we experience magic and time and other ways of passing over, passing through, and death, I think about ghosts, visitations of spirit, messages and information from different spaces, from the astral realm, from ancestors of all kinds, through collaborating with the seasons and thinking about the wisdom that comes through. Like we're in the waning time of the year. Leaves are falling off the trees. There's wisdom there, there's space getting cleared out now. We can sit with that. We can listen, we can be in that energy. I also think about other ways of viewing death, or of the acceptance of death, which so many other cultures have, other than sort of, American culture, for lack of a better word, because I am in the United States. So that's the culture I've been indoctrinated into. But I think about, other ways of being with death, other holidays of honoring death that especially are coming up this month in October. I think about the movements like the death positive movement, what they're trying to do around normalizing death. Like if we normalize death, or if we pondered life through the experience of lifetimes, ancestries, through energy not being killed or not being ended, but energy that goes on in different ways, how would our experience of life change and be informed of it? Can we accept that life is both infinite and finite? Emperor can be about life, but of course, death is also about life, because when we accept that we will die, that our particular physical life will come to an end, we can really focus on what's most important. That becomes highlighted. I've shared before publicly that I live with a life-threatening disease, and that the moment when I was told about my disease and I was informed that my life most likely would be shortened was a really, really important moment for me, of course. I then began this surreal experience of grieving my own life. And I ended up having more of an awakening. And I've spoken to friends of mine who have similar diagnoses, like cancer or MS or severe autoimmune diseases that they live with and impacts them. And it can definitely make us feel a bit separate from those who do not ponder their mortality on the regular. But I do think we've seen this year this pondering of our mortality come up more collectively, right? And we can step into the gifts of that, because if one frequently meditates on death, then over time it really does remind you of what is most important for you in your life. It helps you to focus on your values, your gifts, all that is inherently true to your essence, and expressing that essence. That may be your ego or your fear or society or all the illusions disguised as lies, like being good or being bad or being perfect, or about hierarchies, all of these other things that have tried to drag you away from, to keep you distant from your own true self and one another. That all gets highlighted, right? Which, of course, also is one of the many blessings of working with the energy of the emperor, because we uncover our true self. We become our true self. We begin to shine as our true selves unabashedly, without shame. So maybe this is another way that death is the emperor's teacher. When we work with it with intention, it can help to strip away all that is false to our true essence. When we know more what is false, what is a lie, a distraction, and what is truly us or truly most important to us, we can help step into more of our power and more of our magic. So if you're feeling called during the Scorpio season, through all of these holidays that are coming up around ancestry, around past lives, to meditate on death, to focus on the gifts that meditating and being with the energy of death can bring you, then try it. There's also thinking about more on and extending this idea of what is valuable and sacred to us brings up, of course, how we care for ourselves and the planet. Being so close to death between the pandemic and the current climate crisis and, the pandemics, I would say, of police brutality, all of the ways that death is showing up for us this year, what it's doing is it's urging us to take a different approach and lens to life. What if we took a permaculture approach to life? The tenets of permaculture is people care, earth care, fair care, or future care. What if we took that approach to living our lives? Obviously, there's also paying attention to and learning from those who've been stewarding the earth for thousands of years, listening to them. I recently read this article by Namanti Nemquimo, an indigenous activist and leader from the Amazon rainforest, and I'll put the link in the show notes for you to read. I just wanted to share some quotes that I thought related to all of this, related to the emperor, related to death, related to caring for ourselves and the planet in, different ways. And she writes, "In a terrible way, your society has come to represent the white man that knows too little about the power that he wields and the damages he causes. But for indigenous peoples, it is clear the less you know about something, the less value it has to you, and the easier it is to destroy. You forced your civilization upon us, and now look where we are. Global pandemic, climate crisis, species extinction, and, driving it all, widespread spiritual poverty." I thought that was really poignant and completely on point and completely accurate and completely in alignment with all of these topics that I've been talking about and that we've been considering this year. So thinking about this energy of death helping the emperor archetype to grow, introducing the emperor archetype to a different perspective, maybe we can work with the more elevated or more generative qualities of the emperor to tear down the harmful traits of the emperor that we see all around us. Using the energy of vitality, we have all the technology we need to heal. We have all the technology we need to keep everyone cared for, fed, housed, clothed. There are already maps for ways for us to change and live in different ways. We can use our collective ingenuity and pay attention to other forms of wisdom, indigenous wisdom, different systems altogether. We can start small and keep growing and building another world. I think a very emperor thing also in all of this is knowing your role, which is knowing yourself, right? Knowing your authentic self and removing barriers from expressing that authentic self in service and in care for the collective and for our future planet, our future lineages is so much the emperor being taught by the archetype of death. So my hope is working with death as one of the teacher cards of this year is that after we process this grief, after we process the trauma, after we step into more balance and alignment and figure out how to deal, how to recover from all this loss and move forward, that this sacred energy of death can help us see what is most important in our lives and show us new possibilities. It lets us know that it is okay, possible, an imperative to transform, right? I think about that saying, evolve or die, right? It is possible to evolve and transform. There's a lot here to think about. There's a lot more I wanted to get into, believe it or not. I know, shocking. But I think this sort of talks about the relationships between the emperor and death and brings up teacher cards. I'll be talking probably more about teacher cards because I like it as a concept. Hopefully, I've been able to show you the relationship between these archetypes as well as give you some prompts to meditate on in your own life. What I've been meditating on in my own life is I've been thinking about how the not helpful aspects of the emperor have infiltrated my life and how to death card them out. So like I've been thinking about these ways that I've been indoctrinated with perfectionism and with urgency that don't serve me. And I've been asking myself, like, who am I without this urgency? Who am I without this viewpoint of myself as, in quotes, being professional or something, whatever that means? Who am I through failure or with failure or without failure, right? And then what's underneath there, and how do I clear that out? What's the gift of applying the energy of death to compost that into more freedom and more clarity and more self-love? So you can ask yourself, like, who would I be without certain qualities that maybe aren't even mine, right, anymore? My dears, I will be with you next week when I will return. Thank you for listening. Thanks for being here. If you liked this episode and it gave you stuff to think about, share with a friend. Sharing is caring. And you can rate and review on Apple Podcasts. Moonbeaming is brought to you by Modern Women. It is hosted by me, Sarah Faith Gottesdiener. It is edited by the wonderful Caitlin George Parker. Music is by the most talented Will Owens and myself. Bye. Witches in the voting booth, witches studying for the bar.